Before we get into tonight's topic, just a few comments. First of all, I want to thank those who sent me positive feedback from the last class. I got quite a bit, and I'm very appreciative of that, so thank you. I mentioned this in my other shiurim, that it's always gratifying when you get a comment from someone about the Gemara or about the learning, so that the learning is not just for the hour allotted, but we're thinking about it and considering it even beyond just the class. That's very nice to see that kind of feedback. In that vein, two comments about the blast class. First of all, somebody asked, I don't remember who asked this, but somebody asked about if the person himself is putting out the chametz, and according to the Chak Yaakov, one of the reasons for putting the chametz out before you search is so that the search be a legitimate search and the person doesn't give up. And when he knows he has to find chametz, he'll do a legitimate search. So somebody asked, if you're living alone and you're putting it out yourself, that kind of undermines the purpose. So in this book, in the Sefer Shari Shalom, written by Rabbi Shalom Shpalter, Rosh Yeshiva in Morristown, it's a Sefer of Shurim on Milsech the Pesach. In the back, he has some comments on the Rebbe's Haggadah. So there, he's not addressing directly this question, but he makes point of the language of the Alter Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe writes to put out the chametz, let's find the lashon. Here, when the Alter Rebbe says to put the chametz out, the Alter Rebbe writes, no, I'm sorry, the Rebbe writes. When the Rebbe writes to put the chametz out, the Alter Rebbe, yeah, it's not the Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch, it's the Alter Rebbe in the Seder on which the Rebbe is commenting in the Haggadah. The Alter Rebbe writes, it's a custom to put pieces of chametz, kasher, that are hard so they don't crumble. Zman ma, sometime koydem habdika, before one does the search. So he has a little discussion there, Rabbi Shpalter has a little discussion on why it says sometime before the search. Why not just before the search, and why not right before the search? Miyad lefnei habdika. And he comes to the conclusion that if you put it out too long before the search, then there's the concern that it might get lost, like the concern the Shulchan Aruch brings up with the mice moving it around or children moving it around. And if you put it right before you search, then you'll know where it is, and it'll undermine the purpose of looking for them. That's why he says man ma, sometime before, so that you don't exactly remember where you left him. Anyway, I'm not so sure if it's exactly what the Alter Rebbe meant, but it's a nice little word diuk, which answers the question mentioned last week. So I thought
usually someone else puts it out, not you, the kids or the wife. No, you never put it out.
So he said that last week, that the better thing if someone else did, but somebody asked last week about what happens if you live alone. So I'm just making note of the fact that the Alter Rebbe writes, is man ma, because it is an interesting diuk why the Alter Rebbe uses this language. Is man ma kaid mabdika, sometime before the search, not right before the search, not way earlier, but zman ma. Anyway, that's the one thing I want to point out. Another thing I want to point out is, we were talking about last week that the Rebbe points to the kolboy as a source for the idea that the mitzvah of the search is not to find, but rather the search itself, not the actual finding of chametz, right? That was the first point that Rebbe made, that the finding of the chametz is not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to search, and if you find, to get rid of. And we noted that the Rebbe, when he tells us to look at the kolboy, he tells us to look at kolboy b'shem Rav Hai Goin. Rav Kolboy, as he quotes Rav Hai Goin. And we noted last week from something that Rabbi Shalom Ber Levin pointed out in his comments on the Rebbe's Haggadah, that there are two places where the kolboy mentions this point. One where he states so explicitly in his own words, where he says, we are not concerned with the bracha, because for us, when you make the bracha, when you're searching for the chametz, you're not making the bracha to find chametz, but you're making right? Because the bracha is, I'll be your chametz to destroy the chametz. And if the bracha is not actually to find, but the bracha is that if I find, I will burn. But you don't have to actually find. Rav Hai Goin said that explicitly. But the Rebbe told us to look in Rav Hai Goin, the kolboy said that explicitly. But the Rebbe told us to look at kolboy in the name of Hai Goin. And we suggested some reasons why that is. So last week I was looking at some other pieces from Rebbe's Haggadah and my notes from last year, and I remember the following. So there's a big discussion as to why, I'm not going to get into the whole discussion, but there is a big discussion on why the bracha, when we search for the chametz, is al bir chametz. Before you start searching, you make a bracha, and you say al bir chametz, the commandment of destroying the chametz. And this is the big question that everybody discusses. Why are we making the bracha al bir chametz to destroy the chametz? I'm not destroying the chametz till tomorrow morning when I burn it. Right now I'm about to search. Right? So there's many different explanations. And the Rebbe, in his comments on the Haggadah, taken from the Alter Rebbe with some nuance changes, writes like this. Even though at this time you're not destroying it yet, because you're only searching tomorrow morning you're going to destroy it. Nevertheless, because the search itself is not the ultimate objective of the mitzvah. And after he finishes searching, miyad, right away, he nullifies all the chametz. And he renders ownerless all the chametz that's left behind that he hasn't found. This nullification is called destroying the chametz. So what's the Rebbe saying? The Rebbe is saying like this. The reason why, based on the Rebbe, but the Rebbe's language specifically, the reason why you make the bracha to destroy the chametz before you search is because as soon as you're done searching, you're going to make that declaration, which we mentioned last week. You make a declaration rendering all the chametz ownerless. And that declaration is an effective destruction of chametz. Right? The mitzvah is to rid your house of chametz. By making the declaration of rendering all chametz ownerless, you've effectively fulfilled the mitzvah of getting rid of chametz. So because when you begin searching, you're searching with the intention of getting to the point of making that declaration. And that declaration is biur. That declaration is a form of destroying the chametz you own. Therefore, the bracha is to destroy the chametz. So in the Rebbe's opinion, based on Alter Rebbe, the reason why you make the bracha to destroy the chametz is because at the conclusion of your bedika, however you explain this, which itself is a major pilpul, and many of the Sfarim talk about this, but the bottom line for sure is that in the Rebbe's opinion, the reason why you're making the bracha al bir chametz, to destroy the chametz at the beginning of your search, is because at the conclusion of your search, you're going to make a declaration to nullify the chametz. But what does the Kol Boy say here? What does the Kol Boy say when he says that that the mitzvah is not to find, but the mitzvah is to search? He says, because in our opinion, when you make the bracha before the search, al bir, to destroy the chametz, what's the intention? Levair im nimtza, to destroy if you find chametz. So in the Kol Boy's opinion, it's not the same reason you're making a bracha like the Rebbe's opinion. The reason why you're making a bracha according to the Kol Boy, even though there's no inyan in, even though you don't have to find chametz, the main mitzvah is the search, is that if you find, you will destroy. So what's your bracha going on? On something you might find. But in the Rebbe's opinion, what's your bracha going on? On that which you don't find. Because at the end of your search, you're going to nullify all the chametz you haven't found. And that's what the bracha is going on. So the Rebbe's opinion of how you explain the bracha, bir chametz, is exactly the opposite. Or different than the Kol Boy's explanation for how you make the bracha. And that might be why the Rebbe doesn't cite to this paragraph, or rather cites to Rabbi Goin, where he doesn't make that comment. Where the Rabbi Goin only makes the point that the mitzvah is to search, and therefore the moment you started searching, if you talked afterwards, you don't have to make another bracha because you've already fulfilled the mitzvah of searching. But the Rebbe does not cite to the Kol Boy himself. This is a suggestion of my own, so you can reject this if you'd like. But to me, it seems perfect. Because over here, the Kol Boy gives a reason for why to make the bracha different than the Rebbe's. According to the Kol Boy, again, the bracha al bir chametz is if you were to find chametz, whereas the Rebbe's explanation of what the bracha bir chametz is for the nullification you're going to do on chametz you don't find. So it's in some ways exactly the opposite.
You don't find.
Yeah, because
you don't find.
Yes, when you're done searching, you make a declaration that anything I haven't found, I'm being mevatel. Because the 10 pieces you find, you're not nullifying now. You're nullifying that tomorrow morning when you burn. Right now, what's the declaration? When you're done searching, you make a declaration. What do you say? You say any chametz. If I haven't found it, I'm making it nullified. Right? So the bir, in the Rebbe's opinion, is a declaration you're making on chametz you didn't find. Whereas the Kol Boy says the bracha al bir chametz is that if I do find, I'll destroy it.
So then why are you putting out the 10 pieces? If the whole thing is on the chametz that you don't, I'm saying the Rebbe's way, why are you putting them out?
So you're right, the 10 pieces.
The whole thing is on the ones you didn't find.
Right, so you're right, which is why that was the whole share last week, to explain why we put the 10 pieces out. But in terms of this question, you're right. Those 10 pieces are going to be mevatel the next day. But the bracha al bir chametz has nothing to do with those 10 pieces.
It's for tonight's one.
That's the bracha is for the tonight's declaration.
Right.
The 10 pieces are to help tomorrow's declaration, which the Rebbe explained. We explained last week that when you say kol chamira, it's better if you found pieces the night before. So the 10 pieces are not to help that night's bittul, but to help the next day's bittul. Whereas the bittul that night is on the stuff you didn't find. Yeah?
Yeah, that's also all right.
Okay, let's begin tonight's inyan. So we're all familiar. This is I mentioned in my original comment that the Rebbe's Haggadah is eclectic and it takes from everywhere. Like it's academic in style, so it covers everything. It covers the Nigla, it covers the Kabbalah, it covers the Halacha, it covers the history. And tonight's section, you'll get a glimpse of this, where the Rebbe really covers like every possible angle of something that you would think is like put it this way. I have a Haggadah. There are Haggadahs here that like they collect comments on the Haggadah. They collect a number, like there's many svarim like this where like they'll collect a number of comments on the Haggadah. I don't know that most of them probably don't even comment on the meaning of the Simanim here. KADESH URCHATZ, Karpas, everybody knows it. Every child knows the song, KADESH URCHATZ, right? We all know it. But nobody comments on it because why do you make a big deal out of it? Whatever, it's just a symbol to remember the order. Get to the beef of the Haggadah, then you comment. No, for the Rebbe has a whole long comment on this. The history, the halacha, the poetry, the Kabbalah, mamish, everything breaking it down. This is something that's so unique to the Rebbe. Is like no detail is superfluous. Every detail is covered. Every detail is precise. And we must understand it on every single level. And the Rebbe analyzes it with like using the same word again. I don't like it, but it's the best word to have. This cutting academic kind of manner. Okay, so we're all familiar with this phrasing here, which is the 15 steps of the Seder. KADESH URCHATZ, Karpas, Yachatz, Magad, Rachza, Moitzi Matzah, Hamora, Koyach, Shulchan Aruch, Sofon, Berach, Halan, Yirtzeh. The 15 steps of the HaSeder. We all know it. So comments the Rebbe like this. So we're going to read the Rebbe's comment here, and then I'm going to scroll down to some of the things I put on the page that will help us understand the Rebbe's comment here. If you have it printed out, you're not looking at the screen, we're on page 5. Okay, so first the Rebbe tells us where this comes from. First of all, where does it come from? Where do these 15 steps come from? Right? Last year, 2 years ago, we did a share on that, where the Haggadah came from and who wrote the Haggadah. And as we learned there, it's a conglomerate of customs that have evolved over probably centuries. So it's not as if you'll open up the Shulchan Aruch or the Mishnah or the Gemara and it's going to say, here's the 15 steps of the Seder. It's not the way it is. The Mishnah and the Gemara and the Halacha tell you things you have to do that night. And then the customs evolved to fulfill those obligations. And then somebody at some point made this 15 steps so it's easy to remember. So where did it come from? So the Rebbe does like a little research, like a researcher does research, and tries to finds the earliest mentions of these things. And the Rebbe brings 2 sources for the earliest mentions of this 15-stepped siman, this 15-stepped program for the Seder, or labeling it as such. So first is the Machzor Vitri, in a book called Machzor Vitri. We'll look at what that is in a second. Simin Samachei, section 65, Huvu Simonim Elu. These 15 Simonim are quoted as, quote, Beseder Aruch, in the order that's been laid out, Shesider, that was organized, Rabbi Shlomo by Yitzchaki Zatzal, by Rabbi Shlomo, son of Yitzchak of blessed memory, which is, of course, Rashi. So this is earliest source that Rebbe finds for where this Seder Siman Pesach appears. Who's Machzor Vitri? So just to give us a reference, you can scroll down to page 6. So all the major players that the Rebbe quotes here, because it's a history lesson, so I put who they are and their names and where they're from. So Rashi lives, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, or Shlomo ben Yitzchak, 1040 to 1105 in France. We all know Rashi is comment on Chumash, is comment on the Gemara. Now Machzor Vitri, Machzor means like cycle, it's like a Siddur kind of, and it's essentially a collection of teachings, halachic mostly in nature, that were studied or heard or developed in the study house of Rashi. So it isn't written by Rashi, but it's from Rashi mostly, right? And the primary author is Reb Simcha ben Shmuel, and so it's, according to Wikipedia at least, he died the same year Rashi did. He also lived in France, and he's a student of Rashi. And so therefore in his Machzer, as we can see here in the first text in the bottom of page 6, Machzer Vitri HaYishonis, the old prints of Machzer Vitri, because we'll get to the new print in a moment, where there it says, like the Rebbe quoted, Seder Aruch Shesider Ben Yishlemer Bar Yitzchaki Bar Yitzchak Zatzal. This is the order as it's set out by Rashi, and it goes on to say, first Kadesh, tells you what you do by Kadesh, then Urchatz, and then Karpas, and then Magid, and then on page 7, Rochza, Moitzi Matzah, Mora Koirach, and so on. Shulchan Aruch Tzaf until the end. So this is the earliest source. The earliest source would be Rashi himself, as quoted in the Machzer Vitri by Rashi's student. Then the Rebbe says in the parentheses, and this, it took me a while to figure out who the Rebbe is talking about, but when I discovered who the Rebbe is talking about, my mind was blown. I'm blown away. So the Rebbe puts in the parentheses like this: V'yesh Omrim. There are those that say that it wasn't Rashi, but rather Ki Echad Mibali HaTosfos. It's one of the authors of the Tosfos. So the Tosfos, some of us learn the Tosfos, many of us have seen it on the page of the Gemara, and the Tosfos is not written like an ordinary commentary on the Gemara, which is, one author just commenting. Tosfos, in some ways, actually was true to the original style of the Gemara. The Gemara is not like one author; it's like a conglomerate of conversations put together in like this in this reading format that you have in the Gemara. So you have people speaking of different generations and different times and different schools, and it's been edited and re-edited and redacted. That's what the Gemara evolved over a few centuries. So the Tosfos is written in a similar kind of sense. It's a number of conversations with many different authors, and these authors are called the Baalei HaTosfos, the authors or the people who speak within Tosfos, which is why you have more than one version of Tosfos. You have the Tosfos that we have on the side of the page. You have Tosfos from the Rosh, who his transcripts of these conversations, whether he's part of them or not, I'm not sure, but it's his transcripts of those conversations. You have Tosfos Rid, Tosfos Red Peretz, and Tosfos Shantz, others. So one of the Baalei HaTosfos, his name is Rabbi Shmuel Miplazia, or Miflayish. Not sure to pronounce it, but somewhere in France. Now, who is Rabbi Shmuel of Flayish? He's not a very well-known Baalei HaTosfos. It's not like the Ri, or the Rabbeinu Tam, who are often quoted in Tosfos. It's Rabbi Shmuel of Flayish. It's not so common. So everyone wants to tell us who it is. So Rebbe tells us, you'll see that this Rabbi Shmuel Playesh is quoted in the Or Zarua in Simanay HaSeder. There, Rabbi Shmuel Playesh is quoted. Okay, so let's just look up the Or Zarua so we kind of get an idea, and we'll see a little bit more details in history. So first of all, who's the Or Zarua? The Or Zarua is, you can see here, is a Yitzchak ben Moshe, this is roughly when he lived, between 1200 and 1270, lived in Vienna, one of the earliest Ashkenazi halachic writers. So you can see it's not long after Rashi, within a century after Rashi, right? Rashi passes away in 1105, and this is 1200. So it's a little after Rashi, but he wrote a book of halacha, actually. Rashi has comments on the Gemara and Chumash, which aren't necessarily halachic in nature. There are some responses from Rashi, and then you have Machzer Vitri, which we quoted earlier, the Seder that was written by Rashi students. But Or Zarua is like a formal book of halacha, one of the earliest ones. And in the Or Zarua, in Simanay HaSeder, where the Rebbe told us to look, so we can see on the bottom of page 7. So it says like this: Elu, these are Pirushe Elokei Ruchos, comments on the Elokei Ruchos, L'chol Basav HaPoskim, Pirush Rav Shmuel Miplayish. So this whole Simanay HaSeder, the whole section, the whole chapter 256 in the Or Zarua, which is actually the halachas of Pesach, is a commentary of Shmuel of Playish on something called the Elokei Ruchos. The Elokei Ruchos is like it's almost a poem, but it's a poem that includes all the halachas of Pesach. It's called the Elokei Ruchos of Shabbos Agadol, because it starts from the Shabbos Agadol, it starts from the halachas of the Shabbos before Pesach, and goes through all the halachas of Pesach. And this was written by someone named, you can see him here, Yosef Toiv Elm, the 11th century. So it's also around the same time. In the footnotes of this edition of the Or Zarua, which I put here on the top of page 8, they write that Reb Shmuel Plaza is a contemporary of Or Zarua. Yeah. So we don't get lost. This Yosef Toiv Elm wrote this poem, kind of halachic poem on halachas of Pesach. Reb Shmuel Playish wrote a commentary on this poem, on this halachic poem, and the only extant version of this comment of Shmuel Pliers on the Lekei Aruchas written by Yosef Elm is Yosef Toiv Elm is quoted in the Or Zerua. So the Rebbe is telling us, if you want to know who Shmuel Pliers is, you'll see he's quoted in Or Zerua. Where's he quoted in Or Zerua? He's quoted in Or Zerua as commenting on the Lekei Aruchas. Okay. So there are those that say that this Rabbi Shmuel Pliers, quoted in Or Zerua, continues the Rebbe, he's the one that Chiber Hasimin KADESH URCHATZ. He's the one that authored this structure of KADESH URCHATZ. What's the Rebbe's source? And this blew my mind. What's the Rebbe's source for the fact that the author of KADESH URCHATZ is this Shmuel Pliers? It's not in the Or Zerua. The Or Zerua, which the part where the Or Zerua quotes of Shmuel Pliers, nowhere there, even though it's a commentary on Pesach, nowhere there, from my search, nowhere does it say that he himself authored the Or Zerua, that he himself authored the KADESH URCHATZ Karpas Yachatz. What's the source that Shmuel Pliers is the author? It comes from someone named Shadal B'Shem Ksav Yad. Shadal quoting from a manuscript. Who is Shadal? Anyways, I Googled it trying to find who this Shadal is. And when I found out who it was blown away. And maybe won't be so shocking to you, but to me it was unbelievable. So this is who he is. Shmuel David Lotzato, between 1800 and 1865, from Italy. Now, you Google him and read his Wikipedia page. He was not exactly a mainstream Orthodox scholar. Let's just put it this way. He wrote some things that are critical, like, Bible criticism, somewhat in line with the Haskalah, with the Enlightenment movement that was not exactly friendly to the Orthodox. But the Rebbe is citing him as a source. He is the source. I was blown away. We had the famous statement, Kabbalah se'emes misha omra, accept the truth from whoever says it. I think it's from the Rambam in the introduction to Shemona Prakim. Accept the truth from whoever says it. So Shmuel David Lotzato finds a Ksav Yad, which attributes the KADESH URCHATZ to Rabbi Shmuel Pliers. The Rebbe is going to put it in his Haggadah. Now you know what I mean when I say that the Rebbe's Haggadah is kind of like an academic in that sense. Like it just cuts, it analyzes everything as like in a very pure sense. No. Okay, so where does Shmuel David Lotzato, the Shadal, where does he talk about who the author of the KADESH URCHATZ is? Now this, with the help of Rabbi Levin, I was able to find this, the Levin Sefer. So it comes from a magazine. See, I find this stuff fascinating. It comes from a magazine called The Maggid. So there should be a hey there. It's Maggid. The Maggid is a magazine it's a Tafresh Chabez in the 1800s. It was a Jewish magazine. The picture of the author online seems like he has payas in a beard. So it could be it has an Orthodox bent. But in there, this Shadal, this Lotzato writes an article. And he writes like this. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I don't want to take up too much time. But you can see here the piece here where he says like this. He gives a whole background that I got into my hands. He says, where is it? So there was some person who we met who was a rabbi, a student of the Maril, a whole history. And I found this note, and there I see that Rabbi Shmuel Pliers, he found some manuscript that someone showed him. He gives the credibility of where the manuscript come from. And this manuscript is where it says that Rabbi Shmuel Pliers, he's the author of KADESH URCHATZ Karpas Yachatz. I was very happy, says Shadal, because these Simanim are accepted by everybody and every Haggadah has it. And then he goes on to say, requesting that any publishers of Haggadah henceforth should include who the author is. That's his request, considering that he just found out who the author is. Anyway, I just found it mind-blowing that the Rebbe is, first of all, reading this magazine, and then found in the magazine and quoting this person Shadal as a source for who the author of the 15 Simanim are. To me, it's mind-blowing. So one source is the Mahrash, which says it quoting in the name of Rashi. And the second is Shadal, who's telling us it comes from Balei HaTosfos, which is a little bit after Rashi. Actually, as I showed you before in the footnote of the Or Zerua, that Rabbi Shmuel of Pliers, this Balei HaTosfos is a contemporary of the Or Zerua. Now, if he's a contemporary of the Or Zerua, he's almost a century after Rashi. right? Because Rashi passed away in 1105, and the Zarua is somewhere between 1200 and 1270, right? Which would put, right? So here you see Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo, this is Rabbi Shmuel of Playish, Tosafist, 1240. So it's almost a century later. So it's interesting that there's like a century discrepancy as to who the author is. Rabbi Levin addresses it a little bit, and maybe we'll talk about that soon. Okay, continuing the Rebbe's comment. So now the Rebbe found for us the sources as to where these 15 steps came from, either Machzor Vitri quoting Rashi, or it's Rabbi Shmuel of Playish, one of the Balei Tosfos. Rebbe continues with Pardas Rashi, in a book called Pardas Rashi and Agoyis Maiminis on the Haggadah of the Rambam, Uba Abudraham and the Abudraham. There are other steps, not these 15, but other steps pointed to the Seder in various different variations. So the Rebbe's kind of left this question as to why we're stuck with these 15 if we have others that go just as far back, right? So I put in the sources here who these people are. You can see them quickly. Hagoyis Maiminis is from the 13th century, it's a little bit later, but Abudraham is quite early, 1340, and especially since one of the sources there is Pardas Rashi, so it's also just as far back. So why are we picking these 15 rather than the other ones from Rashi, from Pardas Rashi, from the Abudraham and Hagoyis Maiminis? Says the Rebbe, Previous Rebbe, but in the Previous Rebbe, Shar Chagamas Perik Vav and Zion, and Mishnah Chassidim, Sider Arizal and the Arizal Seder, Mevar Sider Shal Pesach, they explain the order of the Pesach night, Al Pia Siman KADESH URCHATZ. They give the Kabbalistic background to the order of the night based on the 15 steps of KADESH URCHATZ. So we have the Kabbalists ratifying these 15 steps as the correct way of counting the night of the Seder, because they give their Kabbalistic explanation for what happens at the Seder in accordance with these 15 steps. And likewise, the Alshich and the Chidah and others, Perishu al Derech HaMusar, they give the Musar explanation, which is like ethical explanations. So we have all kinds of commentary using the model of these 15 steps as 15 steps to freedom, either Kabbalistically or ethically, whichever, Musar, Kabbalah, whichever way you're going. Either way, they have kind of ratified the 15 steps as the proper steps, and therefore we have them. This seems to be what the Rebbe is saying. Okay, in later pages, I quoted the Abudraham and Pardas Rashi, where you can see the other versions of the orders of the night. We won't have time to go through them now, but if you have the printout, you can have a look at those. It's just interesting to see, compare our 15 steps to those 15 steps, to their steps, and you'll see that the other lists are much longer and much more detailed. Ours is very broad. For example, Magid is one step in our Haggadah. It's one step to tell the story, but you could break it up into much more. You have the question, you have the answer, you have the second cup, right? There's more you can add, and making these steps go from 15 to be longer, depending how detailed you get. So I encourage you to have a look at those texts if you have the PDF. Now the Rebbe comments on the word Urchatz. And here you see again the Rebbe is getting into every detail. So the Rebbe writes like this. Tevazu, this word, Urchatz, is B'tesefes Vav. It's the only one that has a Vav at the beginning, which means and. Every other one of the 15 steps, it just labels them. Kadesh, Karpas, Magid, Rochza, so on. But all of a sudden in Urchatz, the second step, to wash your hands before you eat the vegetable dipped in salt water, there's a Vav. Now what for, says the Rebbe? And this is Gavaldik. So that all of the words in the 15 steps, that are in these 15 steps, they should all have 2 syllables. Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas. They all have 2 syllables. And if you didn't have the Vav, it would be Rechatz. It would be an awkward word to say. It wouldn't flow in the rhyme. So we have to put an extra syllable, and therefore they added the Vav to give it Urchatz. Now, the Rebbe is so certain that the 15 steps have to flow in this kind of easy rhyme, Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, it has to have 2 syllables each, that the Rebbe says as follows. In the Seder of Rav Shabsai Rashkov, which is one of the versions of the Arizal Seder, and a Seder called Kol Yaakov, Isa there, it says Rechatz B'loi Vav. It says Reish, they shouldn't really put it's a mistake that they're putting these, the Kodesh, they shouldn't be there. It says Reish Ches Tzadik, but without a Vav. Now, if that's the case, they're missing the 2 syllables. V'ulai, and therefore perhaps, Menakdim, therefore perhaps, they would put the Nekudes Rachatz, B'shtei Patochim, with two patachs. And that way it'll rhyme. Kadesh, Rachatz, Karpas, Yachatz. Okay, so now the question becomes, we just undid our first answer. Our first answer for why there's a Vav is that the rhyme goes well and you have 2 syllables. But if you can get away without doing a vav and still have two syllables by saying rachatz, well, then why not go that way? Why have the vav? So we have to give another explanation for the vav. So now the Rebbe says, another explanation, taisefes avav, for adding the vav, lahat, and this is now the Rebbe goes from poetry to halacha. The halachic reason for why there's a vav there. What's the halachic reason? Lahadgish, to stress, shetzorachli is kadesh, v'achar katz rechatz. That you have to make kiddush, and only afterwards to wash. Wash your hands after kiddush. Kadesh urchatz. Kadesh and then wash, not the other way around. Even if someone is of the custom that throughout the year he washes before he makes kiddush. Or after roichetz koidem kadesh, if he washes before he makes kiddush, he should go wash again. So what's the Rebbe referring to? Let's scroll down to page bottom of page 9. Here I quote the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe says like this. This is the Rebbe references this in the parentheses.
He has no wine, no?
Let's see. No. Besides for that's also true, but let's see. So this is in the laws of Shabbos. It's Siman Reish Ayin Aleph. It's in the laws of Shabbos. Says the Alter Rebbe, Acher shekiddush ala kos, after a person makes kiddush on his cup of wine, this is a regular Friday night, Yitel yodov l'soda, he should wash his hands in preparation for the meal, v'yavarech, and he should make the blessing on the Tfilas Yadoyim, as we all do, we're all familiar. Now, v'im shachach, if he forgot, v'notel yodov kaidem kiddush, and he washed before he made kiddush. He forgot it's Friday night, I'm not sure how, but he forgot. And he washed, and now he sits down and he realizes he has to make kiddush. So what should he do? Like Yossi is saying, lo yikadosh ala yayin, he shouldn't make kiddush on wine, el ala pas. He should make kiddush on bread. So he holds the challah in his hand and he says Yom HaShishi, and instead of saying ala gofen, you say make kiddush on the bread, on the challah. Because by washing inadvertently before he made kiddush, gila daitoi, he expressed his view, shahapas chavivoloi, that bread is very precious to him, which is why he washed to eat it right away. And it's more precious to miyayin than wine, which is why he forgot about kiddush. And therefore, he should make kiddush on that which is more precious to him. And clearly, bread is more precious to him than wine. And therefore, he should make kiddush on bread. What opinion? That's the way we would practice. That if you accidentally washed, you make kiddush on bread. But ordinarily, wine and then wash. But, says the Alter Rebbe, there are those that disagree. And they say, even in the first instance, he may wash his hands before kiddush. And then make kiddush on wine, not on bread. The ein hakiddush mafsik, and the making kiddush on wine and then presumably drinking the wine too, is not an interruption between the tilas yadayim, between washing his hands, l'suda to the actual suda. No, we avoid talking from when we wash our hands till we eat the challah, because you're not allowed to make an interruption between the washing of the hand until you start your meal. The washing of your hand is a preparation for the meal, and therefore when you wash your hands, you get straight to the meal. You don't make an interruption. But here, there are those that say you wash your hands on a regular Friday night. I don't know if there's, maybe somebody here knows of a community where this is still the prevailing custom.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah,
they have it in.
I think that the Germans do it.
Yeah, the Germans.
Really?
The
Oh, gewaldig.
I went to a meal once by them,
Mm-hmm.
and their minhag was to wash before kiddush, and they made kiddush, and then we went straight to moitzi.
So there you go. And so,
My wife was at a German home where they did the same thing once. Yeah.
wow, that's gewaldig. Okay, I learned something.
It's the Washington Heights community in New York.
Yeah, it's incredible. So he says the Alter Rebbe, the Eina Kiddush Mafspein Tilas Yadayim L'Sada, the Kiddush is not considered an interruption between his washing and his meal, because the Kiddush itself is also part of the meal. And in the same way, people say nu'an after they wash, before they ate bread, before they eat challah. But the truth is, anything to do with the meal, you're allowed to say. You're allowed to say, pass me the salt or give me a knife. Right? So over here, Kiddush is the same thing. It's part of your process of getting to your meal, so it's not considered an interruption. But nonetheless, the primary is like the latter opinion. So it seems like actually that in times Alter Rebbe over there, they also did it that way, like the yakas, like you're saying. This seems to be the custom in our country, says the Alter Rebbe. Levad milil Pesach, besides for the night of the Seder, where then you should wash after you make Kaddish. Kadesh urchatz, Kaddish, and then wash, as will be explained later. The Alter Rebbe says, nevertheless, this is our view. One who wants to be more stringent, not to wash until after Kiddush. Let's talk about a regular Friday night. This is good. And he shouldn't be stopped because he happens to he shouldn't be admonished for changing the minig, the local custom, right? The Alter Rebbe says the local custom there is to wash and then make Kiddush. The Alter Rebbe says, no, if you want to make Kiddush first, go ahead. That's good. And actually, the Alter Rebbe seems to suggest that this is better because you're doing Kedivrei Hakol, you're doing like all opinions. Because you're for sure not making an interruption between your washing and your meal. Okay. And that's what we do. Now back to the Rebbe's comment. So the Rebbe explains, this is why it says Kadesh Urchatz. That's why there is a vav after before the Urchatz. So not just for the fact that the poem should rhyme, have two syllables, Urchatz, because for that alone you could have said Rachatz. There's a halachic reason to tell you that tonight, Kadesh Urchatz, Kiddush, and then wash, even if all year round you wash before Kiddush. Or, says the Rebbe, even if you happen to wash before Kadesh, like you do every other night, you should go back and wash now again in preparation for the Karpas dipped in water. Okay, so we had the history, we had a little bit of poetry, more coming up soon, and then we had our halachic comment. Now the Rebbe gets into Kabbalah. Someone want to say something? No? Okay, now
the main reason why he's washing is because of the Karpas. So
you cut out, Yossi. Say again.
No, the main reason really why he's washing is the Karpas. So that's why it's probably after Kiddush, make the wine, and then that's why it says only the night of Pesach you do it after, because you're doing a Karpas anyways, not like a regular Friday night.
I'm cutting out, but you could do a Karpas Friday night if you wanted to. What do you mean?
I know, but Pesach we do it Dafka. We're doing it there. That's why maybe you wash Dafka then.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The night of the Seder you wash before because of Karpas, and that's why our brother says Kadesh Urchatz, not to be confused with the way you do it Friday night when you wash before. That's why the.
But it's not. It's not the same kind of Urchatz that we wash for bread. We don't make a bracha.
Say it again.
It's not the Urchatz that we do after Kiddush. We don't make a bracha on it, so it's not like we wash for bread.
No, there's no bread. That's right. It's not there. Right. That's right. That's right. Nonetheless, just so that the person doing this shouldn't be confused about it. Anyway, so now the Rebbe gets into Kabbalah, the Kabbalah of Urchatz, the Kabbalah of why it says avav. Now, Abba Morizal, from my father, my teacher of blessed memory. The Rebbe is talking about his own father, Levi Yitzchak. Shemaiti, I heard. And we actually have now a copy of the letter in which Rebbe Leivik writes this teaching to the Rebbe. So I heard, Al Derech HaSoid, based on Kabbalah, Levayir Diuk HaVav, to explain the precise wording of this extra Vav before Urchatz. V'oid Shinoi, and another difference that my father points out, Sheyeshna B'shnei Tevis Elu, that we have in these two words, Kadesh Urchatz, other than the other different than the other 13. Namely, Asher Rak Haim, only these two, Kadesh and Urchatz, Nemru were stated B'loshen Tzivui, as a command. V'lois Sipur, and not a description. Right? Kadesh means you shall wash. Urchatz means you shall make Kiddush. You shall bless. Or you shall sanctify. Urchatz means and you shall wash. Magid doesn't mean you shall say. That would be Tagid. Magid just means saying. It's a description. Same thing with Rochza. Rochza, which is washing your hands before Hamoitzi. Rochza just means a washing. It's a description, not a command. So 13 of them are descriptive. And all of a sudden, the first two are commands. You shall make Kiddush, you shall wash. Why? So explains the Rebbe Leivik al Pi Kabbalah. Ki Kadesh Urchatz, because the first two Kadesh Urchatz, those who are familiar with Kabbalah might be a little bit more apt in understanding what's going on here. I'm not going to say I'm completely fully understanding, but I'll try my best. So Kadesh Urchatz, the first two, Roimzin al Gimel Rishonis the Chachma. Udal the Rishonis the Bina. So Chachma has three portals expressed in the word Kadesh, which is Kiddush. The ultimate Kedusha is Chachma. And the second Sfira is Bina, which has 4 heads, like we have on the Tefillin, and that's Tahara, purification, which is Urchatz, washing the hands. So Kiddush is Chachma, or the three highest levels of Chachma, and Urchatz is the 4 of Bina. Maybe that's why there's 3 letters to Kadesh, Kuf, Dalet, Shin, and there's 4 letters to Urchatz, because there's 4 heads to Bina, Vav, Reish, Ches, Tzadik. Now, in these 7, Kadesh and Urchatz, the Chachma and Bina, Shelo Yehoyo Behem Peido Deshvira. They retained their purity, and they never shattered. These were divine revelations that stayed true to their divine source and never shattered in that. Like, there's a certain concept in Kabbalah called Shviras HaKelim. Just briefly, for those who aren't familiar, or if you are, just to refresh our memory, Shviras HaKelim is a concept that when there's a divine revelation and the recipients of these revelations cannot handle it, then the energy disperses and sometimes ends up in negative places. So the fact that there's negativity in our world based on Kabbalah comes from shattered vessels. It comes from recipients of divine energy that couldn't handle that energy. And because they couldn't handle the energy, they shattered. And then shards of this intense energy ends up scattered all over the cosmos. And therefore our universe has like this extra intense energy because of these shattered vessels. Now, the 2 levels of Chochmah and Bina never shattered. They retained the purity and their connection to the original source, Tashem. And that's what it says here. Because Atik, which means the transcendent one, which is another level of Kabbalah, Atik, the transcendent one, kept Chochmah and Bina for itself, and therefore they never shattered. And this is not the case with the other 13. So there's 15 steps. The first 2, Chochmah and Bina, they stay true to God. They stay true to their divine revelation, their divine source. They don't shatter. Whereas the other 13 do shatter. It's very intense energy. It shatters, and because it shatters, it could have a negative side effect. That's why Kadesh and Urchatz have a vav connecting the 2, as if to say these 2 are in a special class of their own. Kadesh and Urchatz, they're in a special class because these 2 stay true to their original revelation. That's why there's a vav in the middle. V'gam, and likewise, Rakhem, only these 2, Kadesh and Urchatz, top of page 9, top of page 6. Boim b'loshin tzivoy. Only these 2 come as a command rather than a description. Why? Remez ramzu. It comes to hint to something. L'kadesh v'lirchatz, as a command, you should sanctify and you should purify. Kadesh and Urchatz. Urchatz means to wash. Mea p'chinas al yonis. From these 2 divine revelations that stay true to their source, eshar yibul p'chinas. You should use those to cleanse the other 13 steps. Because those other 13 steps, those other 13 elements, they did shatter. And therefore they have to be cleansed by Chochmah and Bina. Karpas through Nirtza. The other 13 steps are alluded to by the other 13 elements that did shatter. They're alluded to by the other 13 steps of Karpas through Nirtza. So I can't say I fully understand everything, but the translation of the words we got. Kadesh and Urchatz, this is Chochmah and Bina, these 2 lofty levels that stay true to their original source. And therefore the command comes, first of all, there's a vav connecting them, because these 2 are of a separate class. And then there's a command, Kadesh Urchatz, sanctify and cleanse the rest of the steps with these 2. With these 2, Chochmah and Bina, sanctify the rest. Use Chochmah and Bina to sanctify the rest of the system, which may have negative side effects. Take it for what it is, a little window into the Rebbe's Kabbalistic understanding of the Seder. Okay, final comment, and now we're going to see more from the Rebbe on the issue of poetry in this Haggadah. Now, Rachza. One of the steps is Rachza, which is the washing of the hands before we eat Moitzi Matzah. So the Rebbe says, Yesh Rotzo Lahagia, there are those who want to edit this word, and they want to write Rachatz. They want to write, instead of Rachza, Rachatz, right? Before we had an opinion which said, before we had a Seder, where was it? Here, Shapsai Rashkov and Ko Yaakov, you see my pointer, it's here. There it says, by Urchatz, it says without a vav and it says Rachatz. Okay? But there are those who want to make that word Rachatz apply to the word Rachza. And instead of Rachza, it should say Rachatz. The Shnei Patachim, with 2 patachs. Aval but, the Machzer Vitri, which we quoted earlier, and the Abudraham, and the Previous Rebbe, and the Mishnah Chassidim, Seder Rizal, Seder Shalos, Seder Yavitz, etc. Isa Rachza, it says Rachza. So it must be that there are proper ways to say Rachza rather than Rachatz. And then the Rebbe concludes, Re'ei Previous Rebbe, Tamadover, see the Previous Rebbe, which gives a reason for why it's Rachza with a hey, where there he explains, because Rachza is, I think, Bina, if I'm not mistaken, and Bina is with a hey. Okay. Now, the Rebbe does not address why there are those that want to say Rachatz. Why is Rachatz more preferable than Rachza? Right, so the Rebbe explained why Rachza is more preferable. First of all, he substantiated the version by quoting all these sources where it's Rachza rather than Rachatz. And then he said, look at the Previous Hayom, and you'll see that Kabbalistically, it's precise that it's Rachza rather than Rachatz. The Hey is precise there, rather than having Reish, Ches, Tzadik. But the Rebbe didn't explain the opinion of those who wanted to write Rachatz. So there's a letter, which is, we have a picture of it on page, I didn't get to this. Maybe we'll get to that after this letter. Okay. There's a letter on page 10. I think it's the last page we have here. Second to last page in this PDF, if you're looking at the printout. So it says it's Igrish KADESH URCHATZ. It's letter 386 and 83 in volume 2 of the Rebbe's letters. So this is a very beautiful letter. It's somebody who, it's volume 2. So it's very early on in the Rebbe's, writing, I should say. And you can see here which years it is. It's Tafshin Hey, Tafshin Ches. So volume 2 is letters from the year 1945 through 1948. And the Seder, this Haggadah was written in 1946. So the Haggadah must have just come out then. And there's somebody who wrote the Rebbe a letter commenting on various different passages of the Rebbe's comments. And then the writer comments on this passage right here about Rachza versus Rachatz. Right, so I mentioned the Rebbe did not explain why those who wanted to write Rachatz thought it was better. So the Rebbe said like this. The writer says, Simanay HaSeder, that the order of the Seder, the 15 steps, heim bechruzin, they're in a rhyme. Ukenira, and it would seem to the writer, says the Rebbe, shebezem mesayeya lergirsosenu Rachza, that the rhyme helps out Rachza. No, I'm sorry. The writer was saying that maybe the reason why it's Rachza is to make it rhyme better, right? Let's go through it, right? KADESH URCHATZ, Karpas Yachatz, Magid Rachza, Moitzi Matzah. So Rachza rhymes with Matzah. So the writer seems to suggest that maybe the reason why it's Rachza is not just for Kabbalistic reasons like the Rebbe said, but actually for the rhyme. Moitzi Matzah, Magid Rachza, Moitzi Matzah. And it goes in twos, KADESH URCHATZ, Karpas Yachatz, Magid Rachza, Moitzi Matzah. And maybe that's why it's Rachza, so it should rhyme better. But the Rebbe says, if you want it to rhyme, actually Rachatz would be better. Uluchurda seemingly says the Rebbe, Ad Rebbe the contrary. The idea of writing it in, if you want to get a proper poem, you should write it Rachatz rather than Rachza. Ki is because then, Gam Beirach v'nirtza nechrazim. Then also Beirach v'nirtza will rhyme. And the Rebbe writes out how you would do it. So KADESH URCHATZ, Karpas Yachatz, Magid Rachatz. Those three rhyme. Marar Kairach, Shochan Orech, Tzaf, and Beirach. Those three all rhyme. Moitzi Matzah rhymes with Hala Nirtza. So it's like a double poem, where at the end of each poem, you have a hey at the end. Matzah, Nirtza. Whereas in our version, you have KADESH URCHATZ, Karpas Yachatz, that rhymes. Magid Rachza, Moitzi Matzah, that rhymes. But Tzaf and Beirach and Hala Nirtza don't rhyme. In our version, Tzaf and Beirach, Hala Nirtza do not rhyme. If the rhyme of Rachza goes to Matzah, Moitzi Matzah, Magid Rachza, Moitzi Matzah, then the next four don't work. Tzaf and Beirach, Hala Nirtza. Tzaf and Beirach does not rhyme with Hala Nirtza. But if you were to go with Magid Rachatz, then if you organize it like this, then you have a rhyme. You have these three rhyming together, KADESH URCHATZ, Karpas Yachatz, Magid Rachatz, and you have Marar Kairach, Shochan Orech, Tzaf and Beirach rhyming, and then Moitzi Matzah will like complete the poem of Hala Nirtza. So even though in the Haggadah, the Rebbe doesn't explain why someone might want to do Rachatz, but over here, in the letter, the Rebbe does explain why you want to do Rachatz. And yet, the Rebbe still rejects it based on all the sources we saw there. The Rebbe quoted all those sources of where it says Rachza, and then the Rebbe said that Kabbalistically it's better to have Rachza, so we're stuck. Now, I don't think this means that the Rebbe is rejecting the notion of the Simanay HaSeder rhyming. And the reason why I don't think so is because the Rebbe told us earlier, his first reason for why the URCHATZ has a vav is so that it should have two syllables. KADESH URCHATZ Karpas, right? So which means the Rebbe does want, the Rebbe is of the view, at least, that it should rhyme, which is why, at least the first explanation was, that's why there's a vav by URCHATZ to make it rhyme. And if you're going to go with Rachatz, like Shabsai Rakshav has that, without the vav, over here, the Rebbe says you should put two patachs, Rachatz, to make it have two syllables. So the idea of it rhyming is clearly of importance to the Rebbe, but nonetheless, the Rebbe's kind of, I don't want to say stuck, but the Rebbe's like, look, I have to say the correct version is Rachza because of all these sources and because of the Kabbalistic explanation. But if you want to go with the rhyme, the Rebbe says in the letter, better go Rachatz. And that way, all of the words will rhyme. See, I find this thing I find this fascinating. Okay, final comment before we close up for tonight, I want to show you. So the first thing we started with was the source for these 15 steps. And we had two sources. One was the Machzor Vitri, which we said was written by the student of Rashi. And he writes there that the order KADESH URCHATZ comes from Rashi himself. And then we had this fellow Shadal who found a handwriting that said that it comes from Shmuel of Paisha, one of the Bali HaTosfos. Those are the two sources that ever told us for where the Simanay HaSeder originate, these 15 steps.
And then the Orzera brings that?
The Orzera doesn't quote the KADESH URCHATZ. I was actually, when I was learning the Haggadah, I was trying to figure out why the Rebbe is putting the Orzera. Till I realized that Rebbe is putting the Orzera just to tell us who Shmuel Plaish is. Because he's not one of the famous Bali HaTosfos. So the Rebbe says, you want to know who he is? He's quoted in the Orzera. Go look there, you'll see. And he happens to be quoted in a commentary that he's giving on Pesach. But in that commentary, it doesn't mention KADESH URCHATZ. Otherwise, Shadal wouldn't have any big find. I mean, it's right there in the Orzera, right? But the Orzera doesn't mention Shmuel of Plaish's comments that are quoted in the Orzera does not include KADESH URCHATZ. It's Shadal's manuscript that he found that says it comes from Shmuel of Plaish. And the Rebbe is telling us, if you want to know who Shmuel of Plaish is, go to the Orzera, you'll see he's quoted there. That's what it seems to me that Rebbe is doing. Because I assume that Rebbe is doing that because Shmuel of Plaish is not a very famous Bali HaTosfos. Okay, but with the help of Rabbi Levin, I found the following. There is, so I have here in the bottom of page 8, this is another one of the order for the Seder, right? You can see it here, much more lengthy than ours. Gefen, Kiddush, Zman, Tilas, Yerokes, Adama, Tavel. It's much more detailed. The steps of the Seder, and it's much more than 15. And this is also in Machzor Vitri, but a newer version of Machzor Vitri. There's a institution there, I think they're called Oitzer Ga'onim, I think it's called. And one of the scholars there is a man named Rabbi Goldschmidt. And he did incredible research on Machzor Vitri, finding original manuscripts and so on. And over there, he does not include the 15 steps of KADESH URCHATZ that the Rebbe quotes from Machzor Vitri from the older versions. Right? When the Rebbe published the Haggadah, Goldschmidt had not done his research, didn't publish that. It's a fairly modern publication. So in this newer version of the Machzor Vitri, the KADESH URCHATZ is not mentioned. Now, Rabbi Levin therefore suggests that it ended up there because someone later added it from the Bali HaTosfos. But it's still difficult to understand how this happened. But I will note that when the Rebbe quotes the Machzor Vitri, he writes like this. It's a little bit unusual, I think. So you see here, Machzor Vitri, in Machzor Vitri, Siman Samachay, section 65, Huvu Simanim Elu, these Simanim are brought, quote, Seder Arach Seder Shem Bar Yitzchaki Zasal, an organized system that Rabbi Shem Bar Yitzchaki said. And there puts the whole thing in quote, as opposed to just saying, look at the Machzor Vitri, Siman Samachay, Huvu B'Shem Rashi, quoted by Rashi or something like that. Rebbe like quotes that over there, this is how it's put out. It almost sounds like maybe I'm reading into it, like what's the, like hindsight 2020, like, now that I know about the Shadal thing, so I'm reading it into the Rebbe, maybe. But the Rebbe knew about Shadal's discovery. And the Rebbe obviously found it legitimate because he put it in the parentheses there. And, he says, Shadal b'shem ksav yad, as if to say, I'm not relying just on Shadal, but on the fact that he found the manuscript. Right? So maybe the Rebbe put the whole quote of what it says in the Machzor Vitri as if to say, look, this is how it's quoted there. This is the way it's quoted there. If that actually came from Rashi, maybe it was added later and someone accidentally said it came from Rashi, I don't know. But the Rebbe doesn't just say, the source of the 15 steps are Rashi as quoted in the Machzor Vitri. That's not how the Rebbe says it. The Rebbe says in the Machzor Vitri, it's quoted in quotations such and such fashion. Maybe this is kind of the Rebbe's alluding to his skepticism about it. Or maybe I'm just reading into it, considering that we already know all this research. Specifically, the research of Goldschmidt, who republished Machzor Vitri after looking up original manuscripts, and there he does not include these 15 steps of KADESH URCHATZ Karpas Yachatz. Okay, so here we get a sense of the Rebbe's eclectic analysis of the Haggadah. literally getting down to details that most people would find arbitrary. Okay, 15 steps, what's the difference? 15 steps, 16, 20. What's the difference? It says with a vav, without a vav. Does it rhyme, not rhyme? It's a cute poem for the kids. Get to the beef of the Seder, That's not the way it works for the Rebbe. Every detail is precise and mamash on every level. Kabbalistic and the poetry, the halacha, the history, all of it. To me, I find this piece extremely fascinating and very unique to the Rebbe style of, certainly as it's found in the Haggadah, this style of learning is found very prominently throughout the Haggadah. A number of times Rebbe will do this. For example, he didn't get to it, but the story, maybe next week we'll do this. The story of the five Talmud Chachamim who sat all night and studied in Breibrak, and the Rebbe goes through a whole pilpul to explain where the source of this is, where exactly the source of the story is. It's not in the Gemara. Other things like that. The Rebbe gets to really almost almost an academic analysis. Where does it come from? Who wrote it? Why did he write it? What's the order? What's the words? Everything's mamish precise on every level, and I find it fascinating. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Shkoyach, thank you. Very nice.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good job.
Good night.